Well, now we are live and we're at full strength. So whatever the technician did, kick-started it. Now, of course, we have no audience. Oh, this is so hilarious, isn't it? It
Everybody
doesn't.
away.
It doesn't snow in a month. We have to settle for. We have to settle for watching it vicariously from our chairs up in the urban corridor, the I-95 urban corridor, because it's all happening in North Carolina. And then I wrote two articles on Facebook, Joe, about this today, and they were both restricted by Facebook as in violation of community standards. So apparently, snow in North Carolina and Virginia is a violation of community standards somehow.
All right, it's kind of weird, Joe. What I'm trying to do is I'm trying to see this on YouTube, and all I keep seeing is you and I, and then then it goes into the PBS NewsHour.
Okay, you know what? You're going to have to. It's a new link. I had
Yeah,
to set up a brand new live stream, so
right.
it's on a different it's on a different URL. But they're
Yeah.
starting to come in dribs and drabs. Anthony Orr is here. Jeffrey Mara, Casey Red Dragon is here. Let me apologize right off the bat to those of you who have been patiently waiting for the start at 8:30. This is an ongoing technical issue that I have, and apparently they at least temporarily resolved it. So while we are, while we have the signal, I guess we should get going.
Yes, because I'm not going to be here for very long.
Right. Okay. So you know what? I'm going to bring up my. Let me bring up my map that I did for the snow for tonight, and we'll bring it up full screen here. Let me just bring it there. Up we go. Pane. Change it. There it is. So this is what I went for, Mr. Rayo. I have a box in northeastern North Carolina that goes into southeastern Virginia that I basically made a 4 inch plus box with in northeastern North Carolina, southeastern Virginia, and then I have another 4 inch plus box from Asheville west to the Tennessee line, and then a larger area of 2 inches that goes up to maybe halfway between Virginia Beach and Norfolk on the northern end, south of Blacksburg. It also continues across the northern part of North Carolina, and then it just kind of tails off from there. But I've seen some folks go well, after I did my forecast. I noticed that the Weather Service is a little bit lower than me, and the a number of other people are a lot higher than me. So I'm in the say in the middle of the range, but on the low end of the middle of the range.
Well, where you have the 4 to 6, which encompasses the city of Rocky Mount, North Carolina, on the weather prediction page for their winter weather outlook, they have a 10% probability of of at least 4 inches of snow in that very same area that you have blocked out there. So they're going for something, some accumulation, but only a 1 in 10 chance of reaching 4 inches, whereas you have 4 to 6. So uh, why don't we simply say that in the northeastern part of North Carolina, maybe on up to Virginia Beach and coastal Virginia, that there's going to be snow tomorrow
Yeah.
night,
Well,
as opposed
I have up. I've got WPC's the 2 inches. Okay, 2 inches or more in that area, and they have a between a 50 and a 70% chance of at least 2 inches in northeastern North Carolina and southeastern Virginia, and also 50 to 70% chance in western North Carolina for at least two. So
right.
they're kind of on the low end of the guidance field. The NAM is the model that's kind of really went off the deep end on this. And in fact, we might have. Let me see how much of the new NAM we have. And then I know you're going to want to leave early because uh, you've
I want
got,
to see I want to see the free for all tonight,
yeah.
the political free for all, with the newest member of the free for all taking most of the punches. I think.
Oh, you have no doubt. But laying politics aside, we've got the new NAM here, and I'm just showing the precip. Uh, it actually gets it in North Carolina a little slower It doesn't make it to western North Carolina until about 10 o'clock tomorrow morning. So it's at least a few hours slower here, and then it gradually expands the snow area. If you draw a line, say from Elizabeth City south and west, from there southeast to the coast, it's mostly rain, and then they'll have to wait till tomorrow evening. I think the issue for northeastern North Carolina and southeastern Virginia is the fact that the bulk of the precip is going to fall tomorrow night. So that will probably, whatever falls during the day tomorrow in western and northern North Carolina and northwestern North Carolina is probably going to have to fight some temperature issues and maybe a little bit of sun angle issue. But for northeastern North Carolina, that snow doesn't get in there until about 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon, and then it snows all night. I've got the map up at 6 p.m. tomorrow night. The northern edge of the snow is in the southern part of the Delmarva Peninsula. The dam actually brings that northern edge north of Richmond, not quite to Washington, D.C., but it is a little bit further to the north than some of the other model runs. I think it's a little too far north, if you ask me. But you got a lot of, there's that big high, you've got cold air draining down, and a little bit of a wedge going on. Not a big wedge, but there's a little bit of wedging going down into Virginia, North Carolina. So I think it should be enough to produce at least a few inches in that area. I can't imagine that they're not going to get anything out of this.
All right. Well, I'll tell you what, when we get together tomorrow night, we'll talk about what some have been suggesting might be our first chance of significant snow in a while, a week from tomorrow.
Right. Well, you know what? By the time we get to it tomorrow night, it'll probably be off the maps, and the low will be going to Chicago. All right. So look, I know you wanted to cut out early, so go ahead. I'm going to continue on with the live stream tonight. And again, I'm apologizing to everybody in a big way with all the nonsense that's been going on today with the connectivity issues, but they seem to have been at least temporarily resolved. I'm going to go back. So I'll see you tomorrow.
All righty. Bye-bye.
Bye. All right. So, folks, I just kind of went back to the 18Z run here, and you can see that wave that develops off the North Carolina coast, and it just slides out to the east-northeast. At 4 a.m., it's still snowing in much of eastern North Carolina, and in fact, by then, the cold air looks like it's worked its way down to the coast, except for the Outer Banks, where it's probably still raining there. Maybe at the very end, it changes over to snow for an hour or two, but I don't think it's going to be cold enough for it to accumulate there. And the low does deepen down to 1,002 millibars and eventually gets into the 990s. And for those of you who are wondering why, oh why, is this not coming up the East Coast? Well, take a look at this upper air, okay? And this will answer your question. I'm just going to back this up to Thursday afternoon, 1 o'clock in the afternoon. And I'm going to mark out the upper flow here. When if you've got winds that are blowing primarily from west to east, it's impossible to take a surface low that's going to form off the North Carolina coast and move it northward. I mean, it really would. You're asking it to move at a 90-degree angle to the flow. That's just that's not going to happen clearly. And the problem is, if you look at this trough, look at that. The trough axis runs east-northeast, west-southwest. It's a clear sign of what you're seeing of cold air that's literally suppressing all of this, and this fast west-to-east flow that is pushing the wave out to the east. And if you watch the trough as we go into Thursday night into Friday morning, it is right on the coast there. Your low at this time is way out. And it's hard to find. There's like maybe a very weak shortwave that is out in the Atlantic. But again, you got a trough like this, it's not going to happen. You need the trough to look something more like this, so that your surface low could run up the East Coast in some fashion. But it just wasn't to be. This is, we have been talking about the fact that with regards to snow this winter. The only way it was going to happen was that if you time out everything perfectly, cold air and the timing of a short wave. And it times out perfectly for Virginia and North Carolina, but it times out terribly for areas up to the north, in the northern mid-Atlantic states and on up into southern and central and northern New England. It's hard for me to feel any kind of sympathy for snow lovers in northern New England and upstate New York out of this because of the fact that, well, every system seems to produce snows north of I-90, and so again, no sympathy from me from that respect. I want to I'm going to punch up the new NAM and just to see if how far out it is. It may not be far. It's out to 29 hours. So that'll take us into Thursday night. And there you have it. I mean, it's really fairly consistent here. Again, that northern edge on this run, for some reason, has precip, the northern edge of precip touching Cape May in New Jersey for about an hour or two. I would suggest that whatever is on that northern fringe is probably aloft, and then it moves on out to the northeast. Let's see how much of the total precip we have. Okay, so if you look at the total precip, here's another thing. When you look at that total precip, that very first light green shading, that's traced to that's 0.01 to 0.05, so hundredths. So I mean, you're barely talking a coating here on that northern fringe. The darkest green is 4/10 of liquid, and much of North Carolina and northeastern North Carolina gets at least a half to as much as 3/4 of an inch of liquid. And if most of that falls as snow, you're certainly going to get every bit of at least 2 to 4 inches, and maybe a bit more than that. So we're at the point now where we're just going to have to watch. We'll watch it tomorrow. We'll watch the radars. Right now, when we look at the radar, you can begin to see that moisture starting to line up across in a very, in this east-west band. It doesn't go that far to the north, and it doesn't extend that far to the south. It's only maybe 150 or so miles wide, so it's kind of narrow here. You're not seeing all this widespread precip. That's just straight overrunning that's occurring with the cold high that's building down from the north, and the increasing northeast winds. You have cold air here. On the other side of the frontal boundary, you have the southwest winds. Your frontal boundary is running along something like this, and your wave is going to just sort of just a flat wave, just going to move along. And then when it gets out here in the Atlantic, that's when it's going to start to strengthen a little bit as it moves away to the northeast. It's a fairly simple setup. It's just that this time around, we have the opposite problem of what we've had. We actually have, this is an instance where you're so deep into the cold air that it can't snow. You can't get the moisture to move up because the upper flow is all wrong. So let's go to the GFS. We're holding on to this signal. I am not unhappy. So let's roll on to the GFS here. And the GFS has been coming around to the NAM's idea to a large extent. There's your low. It's actually a little bit deeper than the NAM is. It's got 1,003 low there, sitting south of Wilmington by 100 plus miles, and then it just sort of slides out to the east. And of course, the same idea, the upper air on the GFS, and that moves out. Meanwhile, after Friday, after that low moves offshore, you'll notice that across the United States, it is bone dry quiet. I mean, there's nothing here in terms of precip. In Colorado and in Kansas and Nebraska, getting a little bit of upslope snows that are going on, and by that I mean you have the east winds coming going east to west and into the Rockies, so you're getting some lift, and that is squeezing out what little moisture there is, and it's producing this area of snow that you see here for tomorrow, for this evening, and then that gradually just disappears as you lose the east winds. The high continues to push to the south and east, and actually the winds then go more southwesterly. And by the way, once the high goes out, we're going to warm up as we go to the weekend. So we'll be cold from now through Friday. And Friday morning, I think, will be the coldest morning. And then we're going to warm up this weekend. Not a whole lot happening. There's some energy that comes into the southwest. You can see this little low that moves into California, Southern California, and produces some rain and snow across Arizona, New Mexico, and on up into Utah. That low is going to run up towards the Great Lakes. And this is going to be another instance, by the way. This is for the middle part of next week. We're going to have another front come through, and it's going to stall out, and we're going to get another wave that's going to come out of this. And you see it here, how the GFS is handling it, and it's going to take it pretty much northeast up the west side of the Appalachians, practically, as it deepens a low near Pittsburgh and into upstate New York, and then eventually into eastern Canada. Now, I would just caution that this could very well be, this is certainly a possibility because of how the upper air is shaping up. It also could be downright wrong in being overzealous here with the trough. So if you look on the jet stream, let me just back it away. So there's our trough that moves on through for tonight and moves out offshore. And then again, here comes your energy into the southwest. You've got some northern stream energy that's coming down and getting involved. And here's where the GFS kind of phases it together. The trough is actually too far to the west on the GFS. The European had a bit of a different view here of all of this, as it doesn't quite have as neat a phase as the GFS does. You'll notice that you've got this is again for the middle part of next week. You have the lead system right here. That's your Monday system. Then you've got this energy that's dropping in, and we're going to roll it along. And of course, that starts to swing eastward. The European actually brings more northern energy down and has the trough running from Lake Superior southeastward toward the Carolinas. And with this, you'll probably wind up with much more of a coastal or coastal-like low. And the issue here is going to be how much cold air gets back in. The European actually tries to bring in some cold air. If we look at the 5,000 foot level on this map, the zero line is literally from just south of Boston to about Montauk to just off the New Jersey coast to off the North Carolina coast, with a 992 low sitting just east of Atlantic City. It did produce accumulating snows even down near the coast with this for Wednesday night into Thursday of next week. But we were a long way off from that. And I would just, I would certainly caution everybody uh, with respect to the kind of winter we've had. If it, there are so many ways this could wind up going in an unfavorable direction, and being that it's only Wednesday, I think it's wise to be skeptical about this for at least the next 3 or 4 days. We have winter weather advisories up, by the way, for all of North Carolina except the southeastern part. We also have winter storm watches up for eastern North Carolina and a small portion of southeast Virginia, and winter weather advisories for southern Virginia. We also have a little bit of activity going on in upstate New York that I want to point out in and around Syracuse, Utica, east of the lake shores, getting some lake effect coming in off Lake Ontario, and they have lake effect snow warnings up for this area. They were actually calling for I believe some 6 to 8 inch snowfalls, which by lake effect standards is not a big deal. But you can see how Binghamton is handling this, giving 5 inches to Syracuse, Utica 5, Rome 5, and then that yellow area is a band of 6 to 8. Let's see if I can pull up the Buffalo, go to the Buffalo office, uh, and see what they're doing for Southwest New York. Nope, that's too far. Hold on. Okay, so let me get their winter map up. These are National Weather Service snow forecast maps that we're looking at. So here's what Buffalo is seeing, because they have the area of responsibility closer to the lake from Sodus to Fulton and Pulaski. So right in that band, it's like the southeast part of Lake Ontario. The wind fetch here in this lake effect band at the moment is kind of like this. So you're getting it. You're getting actually a fetch that comes in not quite the long way, but longer than say if it was moving on a north wind, or if you have a wind that's like straight west across Lake Ontario. And this is when you get those winds. That's when north central New York, this area here, Watertown, Pulaski, gets hit really, really hard when you have the wind coming in that direction. But this time around, the fetch is more northwest, so you get that impact uh, down south and east, and then down toward Syracuse. Less so in Rochester, only an inch or so around Buffalo, and the west, just to cover the folks in Nebraska and Kansas. I'll pull it up on this map here, get it a little wider. Here's what the Weather Service is basically doing across the Carolinas and Virginia with the bigger amounts. Their highest numbers that they're going for are 2 to 3 inches, maybe a few isolated 4-inch amounts here and there. And then when we go west in the other area where we have winter weather advisories, we're looking at in southeastern Colorado getting a bit more. It looks like a 2 to 4, 3 to 5-inch snowfall there, and some 3-inch amounts extending into parts of Kansas, and then the amounts tail off from there. So one other thing, kind of doing it a little bit on the fly, folks, with everything that went on tonight. Probably I'm a little bit off key. Here's WPC's 7-day forecast for precip. So all of this clearly, what's down in the southeast is mostly front end loaded. This goes out to through next Wednesday. So there's a little bit of the next system getting involved with some of these precip totals that you're seeing on WPC's forecast map. So that's it. I'm going to come onto the chat board and spend a little time with you guys. So just give me 1 second here to get my camera stream ready. Oh, what a day. So, Steve LaPointe, 3 inches at most. I don't know. You got to be a little careful down. You have to be a little bit careful with what might happen in North Carolina. Again, I'm on the lower end. I'm a little bit above the Weather Service, but I'm below what I've seen some of the forecasts that are going. Some folks are going for there, I respectfully disagree slightly. I'm just kind of being a little bit cautious, but I could see where there's a little bit of upside out of this. Sometimes the models don't handle the amount of cold air coming down, and even the European got a little more bullish with snow amounts today in southeastern North Carolina. So just kind of want to be a bit cautious here. We'll see what the radar looks like tomorrow morning and what the temperatures look like, because that's really, I think that's probably the most important thing here with respect to what's happening. In fact, I'll just bring up, it's early in the game because the real cold air is not going to get dragged down there until during the day on Thursday. But just looking at some of the current readings, you can't really see it too well on the map. I made it a little bit bigger. Let me see if I can get it a little larger for you. Hang on a second. Okay, so you might be able to see some of these numbers here a bit better. These are 9 p.m. temperatures. So you're looking at 20s, and then you start to get into teens when you get up into upstate New York, in southwestern New York, a small area of teens showing up. The real push hasn't really arrived yet. You're still seeing temperatures, they've dropped down into the low 30s in southern Virginia, down south of Richmond. Richmond's at 34, and we do have temperatures in the upper 30s and low 40s across North Carolina, which is what you would expect at this point. Also, the dew points are running a bit on the high side. The dew points are in blue, so they're closer to the frontal boundary, and that's the reason why you're seeing those dew points a bit on the high side. You get down into Georgia, you're looking at temperatures that are in the 50s with dew points in the 50s. So we're just going to have to wait and see the impact of that high as it builds in. And during the day tomorrow, we'll watch those temperatures. The daytime snows that fall, again, that's why I think those numbers are going to get cut back. But what's in northeastern North Carolina and southeastern Virginia is going to wind up falling at nighttime. So that'll I think that should be mostly snow. Eastern Tennessee Valley, Ethan Bean, you might, it's a little tricky there because you're going to get a little bit of a shadow effect. So you might see the snows tail off a bit west of the of the mountains. So the counties that are on the east side of the mountains are going to do a lot better than the ones that are on the west. So you may see on the western side you may only wind up with a coating to an inch or so, while on the eastern side it could be more like 3 or 4, based on what we're seeing right now. I'm just running through the chat board. Uh, by the way, the the long range, when you look at it, when you look at the overall pattern with the way the polar vortex has been locked up in the Arctic region, uh, usually you start to get into this time of year, that polar vortex begins to weaken and starts to slowly break down, and it has to break down because that's just the way it works. It has to break down. You get into spring, it goes away, slowly but surely. But this one's hanging on. I mean, it really isn't showing any signs of breaking down. When it breaks down early enough, you start to get a really chaotic atmosphere. And when you get a chaotic atmosphere, that's usually when you wind up seeing some rather strong storms. But I was looking at the teleconnections today, and I have to tell you, I was sorely disappointed. And I knew this when I saw the ensembles last night, that it was going to do this. But I'm going to bring up let's see if I can bring up the teleconnections here. Hang on one second, because they really are, they're just not good. Okay? They just aren't. But take a look at this. So here's your PNA, the Pacific North America Index. Your window for something to happen is going to be in the time frame next week, right as we get toward the last days of February, where your PNA is going to shoot up to a fairly strong positive reading here, around February 27th, 28th. But notice, unlike yesterday, notice that PNA goes negative again as we get into the first week of March. Look at the NAO. The NAO is strongly positive right now, so you still have that fire hose jet in the Atlantic. It does come down toward the end of the month. It's still positive, but not as positive, which is about as good as you're going to get this time of year. I'm going to use blue so you can see it better. But you can see how it kind of slopes down there. It gets just about to a plus 100 reading, and then it starts to go back up again. So that fast flow in the Atlantic weakens somewhat. That will be helpful. It would be more helpful for snow lovers if it were to go negative, but obviously that's not going to happen. We It's so odd how over the last 8 or 9 years, the North Atlantic Oscillation has spent very little time negative during the winter months, and then the EPO, which over the last couple of days was showing it going negative toward the end of the month, now actually is strongly positive right now. It goes down to close to the neutral line, and then it's kind of weakly positive after that. So as far as whatever might happen toward the latter part of next week, uh, we're just going to have to work with what we got. And it makes, to me, it just makes things rather tenuous when it comes to trying to figure out where this is all where this is all going to ultimately wind up. Paul Roman, I just want to hear the words winter storm warnings here one time this year. Well, you know what? Uh, We haven't had a winter storm warning up. I don't think Chicago has had a winter storm warning up. It's just that kind of winter. You can't have the polar vortex wrapped up like a ball up in the Arctic region, and do much with it. The only way you wind up seeing anything happen is if you get that perfect timing between whatever cold air there is that comes down in the north, and you get something that moves along in the southern stream. Eastern Long Island, Bill, in that situation for later next week on the European, I mean, I think it gave Long Island basically a couple of inches out of it, with higher amounts western Long Island and westward, including the Jersey Shore. But then the amounts tail off as you go not that far to the south. We're going to need to see the models come in a little flatter and a little colder, and we got to get the timing issue to kind of work out in order to pull something off, even if it winds up being a minor event. Because maybe that's what ultimately that's maybe what it'll be. I don't know. We'll see. We'll have to just see how the models evolve. If this storm comes together for next week, it should be a fast mover with the positive NAO. That's yes, absolutely, Jason Barry. The only solace in the NAO is the fact that yeah, it's positive, but it's not that fire hose positive that we just saw. It's coming well off the highs. It's still there. It's not quite as strong, so maybe that'll slow the flow down a little bit. Uh, but it's still it'd be a whole lot better if it was down near the neutral line or maybe even a little bit negative. But that would certainly be more helpful for snow lovers that way. Yes, Ruthless Goat, after 3 or 4 attempts, I finally made it live tonight. It's just insane. Winter 11-12, so snowless in Albany except for leap day into March 1st, 8 inches was your last gasp. After that, we got 3 straight days of trace, point 0.3, and then trace on the 10th and trace on the 31st. That that year 11-12 was one of those. I always confused whether was it a La Nina year or an El Nino year. I think was it a deep La Nina, a strong La Nina that year. Uh, I forget, but it was one of the two, and obviously. So that was an instance. The same thing happened that year when you had that polar vortex just gets wrapped. Whenever there's a raging El Nino going on, the polar vortex just gets wrapped up in the Arctic region, and you can't do anything with it. All the cold air stays up there. So I don't. I would like to see in post analysis what those that are really, at higher pay grades than me that really look at this stuff and highly technical nature of it. Um, what the explanation is to get the polar vortex wrapped up in a way that you would normally see in a strong El Nino or strong La Nina year when we don't have either one happening. Maybe you can make a case that there's a very tiny El Nino going on central and west. I saw a few people were talking about that, but there's something else at work here that's caused all this to happen. And one of the one of the changes, at least up in the Arctic region, is that we do have a more robust growth of sea ice this winter because all the cold air has been up there. What is preventing the 920 millibar storm that was in North Atlantic from causing more of a pattern change? Anthony Orr asks. Honestly, I think it's the state of the polar vortex up in the stratosphere. It's just too dominant. It's too strong and too dominant, and I think it's just kind of, basically, um, it's calling all the shots. The that storm has probably caused a bit of a change in that it's allowed some of this cold air to come southward that we're seeing now. But in terms of a wholesale change, something that would have gone in there and just kind of blown everything up, as far as the pattern is concerned, um, it just didn't happen. Do you think the storm for next week has a chance to go further offshore and be more of a threat? Well, what's going to have to be you're going to have a flatter looking upper air for that to happen. So we'll just have to wait and see how the models evolve through all of this. It's a challenge. Obviously, we're almost to March. I mean, how much time do we really have, considering the upper pattern is so awful that even if it was to change, the we're just out of time. MJO has been really bad this winter. Izzy D, yeah, I mean that's been pretty much in warm phases all winter long. Sometimes I don't. The thing with the Madden Julian oscillation is sometimes that couples with what's going on across the Pacific and over the U.S. and out into the Atlantic, and sometimes it doesn't. So I just wonder. I just wonder if the polar vortex weren't as strong, whether you would have had a whole different, a whole different scheme of events that would have occurred. Obviously, you would have had a whole different scheme of events that would have occurred. I also, and Steve LaPointe, I think you make a good point here. I also, it you don't want to draw too many correlations between what's happening now and what might happen in the spring and going into the summer. Zim is on. Nice to see you. They talked about the increased sea heights higher than average in the last 20 years. What impacts? I don't know. I don't know what the impacts would be on the other seasons. There were a few people that were arguing that the lack of sea ice should have caused a weak polar vortex, and the absolute opposite has occurred. I'm starting to wonder whether it might be, a more extensive sea ice uh, situation over time might be more favorable for colder winters. I'm just kind of thinking off the top of my head. You drive yourself crazy with all the possible combinations of things. You think you have it all figured out. You've got all these different things that you look at in the fall, and you say, okay, this has to be a cold winter for the eastern part of the United States, and something comes along and throws the forecast completely into chaos. And this is why I really don't have a whole lot of faith in anything that I hear about with regards to the long range. The only thing that seems to work fairly well is that when you have a strong La Nina, the hurricane seasons in the Atlantic tend to be very active. When you have a strong El Nino, the hurricane seasons tend to be relatively inactive. Uh, why wouldn't you be able to make the same prediction for spring and summer? Well, Rob SP32. First off, I don't really get into the long range. I leave that for other people to do. Also, I don't know that you don't really see too many spring forecasts and summer and autumn forecasts uh, as you do the winter forecasts. And the winter forecast long ranges are they're all the same. They're the same every year. Every year it's going to be a cold and snowy winter in the eastern United States. And the reason for that is because if you if you write something that says the opposite, you're not going to get many clicks on that article. So I just think a lot of there are some people who I believe are very sincere and give it a solid try when it comes to what they think the long range is like. But I honestly think the vast majority of the stuff you see out there isn't really worth the paper it's written on. In my never to be humble opinion, there are respectable folks that I would certainly pay some attention to, but again, with the long range, you have to always look at it with a big grain of salt. Is it possible that the cold sea ice would mean that April could be cooler? I don't know, Zim. I think it might be the opposite. If that polar vortex holds on longer up there, you could wind up maybe warming it up quite a bit. And by the way, with that Pacific North America index going negative into that, when we get into March, that when the PNA is negative, that is a signal for severe weather across the South. Because the trough wants to go in the west if that's the case, and that usually means severe weather issues as we get into the month of March. So we're going to start having to pay more attention to that in the next few weeks. Okay, so you know what? We managed to pull it off tonight. I don't know how, but we did. Joe had to go, but we'll be back tomorrow night, and hopefully the technician comes out tomorrow and finds whatever the problem is and fixes it. So thanks very much. I appreciate your patience again. This was with all the technical issues, it was a one big huge pain in the rear end. Okay, so have a great night, and we'll see you tomorrow. Good night, everybody.